You know how bad things can be. I mean, what's that?
But I also know how good they can be. So if we only focus on the things that have gone wrong, life gets to be pretty heavy and unhappy, and if you don't see the potential in things, it's just not right. I still get, when I'm out in a shopping center, I'll get a girls' court girl who will come and say, Judge Radius. And I'll say, oh, how are you doing? What are you doing? And she'll say, oh, I'm graduating from Windward Community College next week. And so we show up and give her a lei, because those kinds of stories keep you going.
Judge Karen Radius, a resident of Windward, Oahu, has spent her career seeking the potential in people facing troubled situations. Family court judge and the founding judge of Girls Court. Karen Radius, next on Long Story Short.
Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox is Hawaii's first weekly television program produced and broadcast in high definition.
Aloha mai kākou, I'm Leslie Wilcox. Family court is often regarded as a place of pain and anger, filled with divorces, child custody battles, families in crisis. Judge Karen Radius has spent decades there. She retired but returned to serve on a part-time basis. The judge is no softie. She's regarded as tough but fair. In her juvenile cases, she tries to look past the pain toward the potential good within the youth offenders who come before her. To help Hawaii's troubled young people, Judge Radius in 2004 was the driving force behind Girls Court, an innovative program designed specifically for at-risk girls on Oahu. The judge and others in the field say that juvenile court is framed around boys who tend to commit different offenses than girls for different reasons. Judge Karen Radius knows firsthand about life struggles, having grown up on the south side of Chicago.
Well, my mom was the oldest of 10. By the time she graduated from 8th grade in 1932, there were 7 kids. The 7th child had just been born a couple months before. So her mom said to her, we just don't have the money for you to go to high school. You need to find a job. My grandpa was a janitor, and finding a job for him depended on what manufacturing plants or what buildings were open and what businesses could hire him. So he was getting piecemeal work at about $1 a day. So my mother found a job being a maid and mother's helper for a lawyer's wife who had 1 son. So after being the oldest girl of 7 kids, that was a walk in the park, quite frankly.
But she had to be away from her family.
Absolutely. So she stayed. She earned $1 a week, and she had Sundays off, so she'd come home on Sundays, bring her $1, and her mother would give her a dime.
Tough times.
Yeah, absolutely.
People had to really pull together and sacrifice themselves.
Right, right. And so the theory was that her younger sisters would all take a year off of high school, but it didn't turn out that way. She stayed working at that job.
Never graduated from high school?
Nope, nope. She took typing and a bookkeeping class at night school. But other than that, she didn't go to high school.
Did she talk about that, her regrets at that?
Not so much her regrets. That's a generation that doesn't focus on themselves. But she clearly, my sister and myself, there was no question. We were going to get every ounce of education we could.
She was going to do for you what she couldn't do for herself.
That's right. My dad had been in the military, actually here in Hawaii, and had gone back to Chicago and was a bus driver. And he saw her walk on his bus, and he said, that's the most lovely pair of hands I've ever seen somebody put in fare in my fare box.
He said that to her?
To her, and she fell for it. And, and the rest is history, yeah. Yeah.
And he stopped being a bus driver after that?
Right. When I was about 3, he became a life insurance salesman and did that till he died.
So he was a good salesman, charming?
Oh, yeah. He could tell us a joke and a story. He was a schmoozer, yeah.
Judge Karen Radius became the first person in her family to graduate from high school. Her mother believed that Karen should receive the best education possible, even though money was scarce. She was accepted into George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and left the Midwest for the first time in her life.
Anyway, I found George Washington, My mom said, okay, we've got enough money for one semester. Go, see if you like it. We'll do what we can. You got to work. I went to GW because I thought I was interested in international affairs. I had read some books about Russia, and that was when the Cold War was big. And Russia seemed such a fascinating place. So I went to study international affairs. But in my sophomore year, when you begin to think about what major you're going to declare and the counselors are talking to you, I told them that that's what I was interested in, and maybe the State Department or some kind of foreign job. And he says, do you know what women do in the Foreign Service? I said, no, that's what I'm here to learn. And he said, they stamp passports. And I was silly enough to believe him. So I switched to political science.
So that wasn't true? He was just trying to... What was the point of that, of dissuading you?
Oh, no, I think that was probably true back then, but so that would have been 1960, 68.
So he was trying to let
67,
you know that, hey,
68.
That may not be...
In reality, if I wasn't willing to stamp passports the rest of my life, which is probably what women mostly did back then, but things have, as in all fields, have moved quite a bit.
So you could have done it and broken those barriers?
Maybe, but I didn't listen. So I mean, I listened. I should have not listened. I kind of wonder what it would have been had it taken different turns. So I went into political science. My junior and senior years, the Vietnam War was booming, literally and figuratively. The protests were beginning. You know, being in campus only 5 blocks from the White House, there were tanks rolling down the street sometimes, and tear gas being thrown on the campus, which wasn't fun. So I decided, okay, I'm going to work on the Hill, because that's where change could come from, through senators and congressmen.
Well, who'd you work for?
Senator Charles Mathias from Maryland. He was a progressive Republican at the time. People wrote to their senators and congressmen, and we'd get bags and bags and bags full of mail, and we had to respond to each piece. So my job was to, when there were over 10 letters about a single topic, you'd write a form letter that sounded like you were talking directly to that person. And then there was a machine that would, we're way pre-computers, but there was a Dura machine that would match the letter, the address of the writer, and the body of the letter, and then they'd be signed, and you thought you got your own personal letter from the senator. Which he read the generalized, so he knew, and he knew how many. We kept count of X number are in favor of this and Y number are against that. But it didn't feel like democracy, like I had studied it as political science, and I didn't feel like we were making the kind of change that, as a baby boomer, I thought we needed.
Oahu judge Karen Radius did not want to get channeled into a typing job, as were many women of the time. She wanted to be part of bringing change, so she set her sights on a new career path.
One of the young male staffers who was an attorney said to me, Karen, just take the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test. Don't tell anybody you're going to take it. Don't send the scores anyplace. If you totally bomb out, you've wasted a day, $50 to sign up for it, and two number 2 pencils. So what? If you do well, send the scores someplace. And so I followed his advice, and here I am.
You hadn't considered law school?
No.
Wow,
no.
That's really open. So you went and took the test and did well. It's a tough test.
Yep.
And what proportion of students in law schools were females then?
About 3 to 4%.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So you were an oddity.
Right.
Did you feel like you had to prove yourself?
There were still professors who would do things like say, can you please stand up as you give your answer, because I like to see the proportions of my opponent. And you walked in the library and people closed the door as you entered. So it wasn't blatant. You didn't get worse grades because you're a woman. You didn't get worse classes.
It was a social atmosphere.
It was a, you knew, I had one young man say to me, you know, my friend didn't get in. You've got his seat. So, but generally, I mean, people were nice, and as you stayed and as more women came in, life went on.
After her second year at George Washington University Law School, Judge Karen Radius joined her college roommate Judy Sobin on a trip to Hawaii for the summer. She didn't know it at the time, but Hawaii would become her permanent home.
I had come here to Hawaii between my second and third years of law school for a summer job because there was no UH law school at the time, and my college roommate had come here with her husband, and he was going to UH Masters in Urban Planning program. There was something about Hawaii, I just felt at home when I got off the plane.
What made you feel at home when you got off the plane? I mean, you hadn't seen it yet.
I don't know. I just did. I worked for Brooke Hart's firm the summer between second and third years of law school. They were doing a lot of law reform cases. They were doing a lot of criminal cases, but doing them very well and lots of interesting cases. So the work seemed exciting. I was meeting a lot of younger lawyers. The racial and ethnic makeup and background of so many different kinds of people, and the mountains and the ocean, and it just felt good.
A year later, after graduating from law school, Judge Karen Radius returned to the islands to take the bar exam.
I came here to take the bar because I had a federal job offer in North Carolina, and you could be licensed any place. So I came here to take the bar, hedging my bets that while I'm here studying for the bar, I could still be looking for work here.
Because you didn't want to go to the safe federal job?
I might own a horse farm in North Carolina now if I'd done that job, as opposed to my little plot.
But this was where you preferred to be.
Oh, yeah. No, I got offered a job 2 weeks before the bar. Oh, legal aid called 2 weeks before.
How did you feel about working for legal aid?
That was fine with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that means you served many of the poorest people in the area.
Absolutely.
Lots of family law.
No, actually at that point we were divided into divisions, and I was doing welfare law. So I was doing your benefits were stopped or the state wasn't complying with the federal laws about welfare benefits, food stamp benefits, Medicaid. So I was doing more the keep your life and soul together money and
so
advice.
That means you had a good you met people and saw individual stories of things that had happened which required government assistance.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, so in two jobs then, with the defense law firm, Brooke Hart's firm, and with legal aid, you're basically on the other side of the state, right? You're
I'm meeting the real people. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
You're underdogs is what I
Right.
would call it. How did you feel about that? And it's not big money jobs either necessarily.
Correct. Right.
So neither of, is that what you were looking for? You didn't care about the money, and you wanted to help people who needed the help, who didn't have much? Was that a goal, or just how life
I didn't become
unfolded?
a lawyer to make money. I became a lawyer because I didn't want to type, and because I believe that some of the most resilient people I've met are people who have been, quote, underdogs, and they have potential and good things to add to the state. So doing that kind of law was perfectly fine with me.
Yeah, it had to. I mean, you saw a lot of misery.
Yes, yeah. But the people who were in the midst of their problems don't come in with, I'm in the midst of a lot of misery. They come in with, I've got this problem and I got to solve it because I'm getting evicted, because I can't feed my kids, because they weren't drama queens, let's put it that way. So they had resiliency despite the fact that they lived in situations that were really challenging. I always said when I left legal aid, you knew when it was time to leave, because I used to keep graham crackers in my desk, because the people would come and they'd always bring their kids, and their kids were always hungry. So I gave the kids coloring stuff and graham crackers, and while we talked about the case. And I said you knew it was time to leave when you just got a little bit tired shopping for graham crackers.
After 5 years, Judge Karen Radius left legal aid for private law practice. Along the way, she married future court administrator Russell Tellio.
So I worked for about 9 months for Harriet Bauslag, who was a legend in her own right. And then Norman Lau and Susan Arnett and I, who all three of us had worked at legal aid, decided we're going to open our own firm. So we did that January 2, 1980. And the three of us worked together for a while, and then Susan decided she wanted to do criminal stuff, and Norman and I didn't. So we became Radius and Lau, and stayed that way for 13 years until I got to be a judge.
Why did you become a judge?
This is going to sound really silly. When my kids were born in 1985, I had twins. And Norman and I were doing a real varied civil law practice. So you'd have to always be one step ahead of the clients and learn a lot of different things all the time. So having children knew that I needed to specialize in something, because trying to be such a generalist was, I needed time at home with the kids.
And you had two at once.
Yes, yeah, and you have to sleep once in a while.
In 1993, Karen Radius was appointed as a judge to the First Circuit Family Court on Oahu. She presided over cases involving divorce, child custody, domestic abuse, and juvenile law. Much like her time at legal aid, she matter-of-factly looked for the upside in people facing tough situations.
It's a place you could be a peacemaker. You may not be able to stop the divorce, but if you can focus the parents on the children and on preserving the assets they have for the children's best interest and coming up with a visitation and custody plan that's in the kids' best interest, you can bring peace. Or if not total peace, at least ratchet things down. If you're doing an adoption, that's the fun part of family law. So you leave the stress and the sweat in the waiting room and you come into the courtroom where there's balloons and happy people and pictures and congratulations. The other thing about being a family court judge is if the judge can portray some kind of calm and can manage the courtroom in a way that it's not just total havoc, that people can focus a little bit better about what they need to do and what's next and how to bring some kind of resolution to the problems that are there. And sometimes you can't bring peaceful resolutions. You just make a decision and it happens and they're unhappy with you and they're unhappy with their life.
While working as a family court judge, Karen Radius began to notice an alarming trend within the juvenile cases. The number of girls who were arrested and brought to court was dramatically increasing. In 2004, she confronted the problem head-on by creating a new program called Girls Courts.
In the days that I was a legal aid lawyer in Waianae in the 70s, there was hardly ever a girl got brought to juvenile court. Girls weren't arrested. It was all boys. And over time, the programs and the method of dealing with things were built for boys because that's who the system was. But as time went on, more and more girls started to be arrested, and programs weren't built for them. And juvenile court really wasn't helping the girls at all. So in about 2003, I was sitting at detention home where you go every morning for a week in a row, every 4 weeks. And all of a sudden there was just so many girls appearing in front of me, and I'm thinking, maybe it's just the luck of the draw, because that's based on who got arrested. You got to see a judge within 48 hours of getting arrested. And so I'm thinking, and so I went back to the courthouse, I'm saying, you know, boy, I saw out of 13 kids, 10 were girls. Is it just me? Am I somehow a girl magnet? What is this? And they said, no, we think so. So we started to do some research, and at that point, 42% of the arrests in Honolulu were girls. Nationally, it was about between 20 and 25%, but Honolulu was 42%.
I wonder why.
We arrest a lot for runaway, and we have a lot of runaway girls. And girls tend to act out not so much against other people, although there are some assaults on unrelated people, etc., but there's a lot of act out against a boyfriend, act out against a mother, and then drugs are a problem, act out against themselves by taking or possessing or dealing drugs. So I talked to Judge Wong, who was then the lead judge of family court, the senior judge, and she was doing some rearrangement of people's caseloads, and so she wanted to move some of my cases. I said, and she says, I know you're going to be mad. I said, no, I'm not going to be mad if you let me do girls' court. She said, what's that? And I said, I don't know, but we got to do something. And she said, okay.
So you were convinced you couldn't fix it by, you know, transforming juvenile court?
Well, it's still a part of juvenile court. It's a transformation of, not every girl who gets arrested in Honolulu goes to girls' court. Girls' court is the girls who aren't succeeding on regular probation. So anyway, we looked at what's going on in the girl's life, not just what she did, because often a sentence or a disposition is based on you did X crime, X thing, and therefore you must do the following community service, you must do the following anger management, etc. But what else is there in going on in her life that gets her in this situation that makes it that she's acting out like this?
And she's a revolving door.
And she's a revolving door. You know, she's not going to school for long periods of time. The old days, you would put her in detention home for 2 weeks and say, okay, write an essay on why education's important to you. She didn't know. And she'd write the essay, and she'd be scared for a while, and she'd go to school for maybe 2-3 weeks, and then the whole thing would start again. And the next run would happen, or the next truancy would happen, and back and forth. And so we weren't looking at the underlying causes. So girls' court is all about getting to know the whole family, working on the relationships within the family. So, and the probation officers are still probation officers, but they're also not just, did you comply with the court's order and what the court told you to do, but let's figure out your life and let's come up with a life's plan for you.
In 2010, Judge Karen Radius retired as a full-time judge to help take care of her aging mother and her mother-in-law. At the time of our conversation in 2015, she had returned to work as a per diem or part-time family court judge.
Let's say the top 3 things you've done in your life that you really feel proud of.
I think my kids, number one, and watching them grow and develop and lead their lives and make the choices they make one way or the other. Girls' court. Jeez.
Well, top 2 is good. You narrow it down to 2.
I don't know.
I'm just thinking from a balance of power situation. You know, this is not the old model of husband and wife where the wife is the judge. Was that hard to handle sometimes?
Not for me. No. We didn't bring our work home, and those times that I would say something that I wasn't happy about something, Russ would say, slavery ended in the 1860s. If you don't like the job, find another one. So, okay, I'm not going to complain at home.
Well, and you had twins.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about them, about how they were influenced by 2 parents working in the law.
My son's a lawyer, so although he has a sticker on his filing cabinet that said, born to fish, forced to work. So in a perfect world, he might want to fish. But no, he's a lawyer. He's a good lawyer. My daughter, when she was probably about 5 or 6, I said to her, you know, are you going to work when you get married and have children? Because being old school, I still felt a little bit of guilt about I'm working. And she says, of course I'm going to work, but I'm not going to be a lawyer. That's boring. So at 6, she already decided it's boring. So she's a scientist. She's a biomedical engineer, and smarter than me.
Did you think of your kids as you were in court, just, you know, passing judgments?
Yeah, I thought about my kids. Because of confidentiality of the cases, I couldn't talk about the cases to the kids. But I've said things sometimes to the kids, and my son, when he was little, used to say, Mom, you always know about all, and you're all so worried about evil stuff. You know, you just don't know the real world. And I said, oh, Andrew, your father and I have worked so hard so that you don't know about the real world.
Founding Judge Karen Radius's concept of girls' court has now spread to several states on the continent. At the time of our conversation in the summer of 2015, she continues to be an advocate for at-risk youth inside and outside the courtroom. Judge Radius volunteers for several nonprofits and is the president of Surfriders Spirit Sessions, a nonprofit that uses the lessons of surfing to help transform the lives of at-risk youth. Mahalo to Judge Karen Radius of Kailua, Windward, Oahu for sharing your story with us. And thank you for joining us. For PBS Hawaii and Long Story Short, I'm Leslie Wilcox. Aloha hui ho.
For audio and written transcripts of all episodes of Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox, visit pbshawaii.org. To download free podcasts of Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox, go to the Apple iTunes Store or visit pbshawaii.org.
What did your mother say to you after she saw you become a judge?
She wished I'd been a beautician because I'd be home more.
Truly?
Yes, seriously. When I first went off to college, she said, do this for you and for me. And I was, quite frankly, a little bit, it's me. What do you mean, for you? But having a daughter now myself, I understand.